26th Avenue is being restored to increasingly come to its original appearance by my godbrother Vamandev Prabhu, who was here before I joined, and Adidev Prabhu, who wasn't here but who's expert in such matters, under the guidance of His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj. When I first came, Srila Prabhupada had already left. I'd read an article about life here at 26 Second Avenue in a underground magazine. So I knew that something was here, but I didn't wind up coming here until I came here in 1968. I sort of scouted the place out from across the street, screwed up my courage and came in one Sunday afternoon. And the place was empty pretty much. Where those posters are on the shoe rack, there were shelves, just basically brackets on the wall and some boards with Srimad Bhagavatam and Easy Journey to Other Planets, a few other little publications. And there was a desk there. Is there a desk there? No. Facing the window. And there is. There was one girl sort of sitting around here someplace, Balai Dasi, who's still there in Los Angeles, stuffing some envelopes with some printed things. And I asked if I could look at the book. She said, yeah. So I was sort of checking the place out from behind the book, some reading, Easy Journey to Other Planets, and some looking at the lighting wasn't like this. There were floodlights just hanging from something, from the ceiling. But otherwise, and I think the walls were darker. In any case, the main feature of 26 Second Avenue then was that most of the devotees had personal touch with Srila Prabhupada, Brahmananda certainly, Madhusudan, and Purushottam, Rama, Hansadutta. Most of the devotees had been there and were waiting for Prabhupada to come back. So there was this real sense of connection with Srila Prabhupada, even though he wasn't here. Back then when somebody said Prabhupada said, it meant they'd heard it personally. If it's Prabhupada wanted us to do this or didn't want us to do that, they were speaking from personal experience. The cooking was the way Prabhupada had taught them. So much was, and Prabhupada was writing regularly to Brahmananda, giving direction or inquiring about things. So even in his absence, Prabhupada was very much present here at the time that I joined. Prabhupada was returning via the West Coast, coming back from India via San Francisco, then flying to New York. And the devotees borrowed 2 television sets and set them up in Prabhupada's quarters, because Prabhupada was appearing on some television show from California. And I remember they were like running back and forth to see which set was getting better reception. And the show started, and devotees were like falling all over themselves. Oh, there's Janaki, there's Mukunda, there's this one, there's the devotees. And Prabhupada, of course, was on the show. Mukunda, as I remember, was sitting next to Prabhupada maybe dressed like an American gentleman, anyway. And Prabhupada led kirtan, and they showed close-ups of Prabhupada's hands, precisely playing the kartal with great precision. And devotees were practically rolling on the ground seeing Prabhupada on the television. And then Prabhupada came not much longer after that. And if I remember, he was quite late because of traffic. At least a couple of occasions it was like that. I don't remember if it was the first occasion or not. But Prabhupada was, first, what should I say, countercultural, contaminated person like me. He was coming from another world, teachings I didn't know anything about, a culture I didn't know anything about, and even following a way of life I didn't know anything about. But somehow or other, I'd already taken to it. In Prabhupada's absence, the devotees had convinced me, what are you doing? Well, why don't you do this? Well, I think I will. Well, why don't you do it now? So I did. No one lived here, but except for Prabhupada in his apartment in the back. For those who haven't been here, there's a courtyard in the back, and then there's an apartment building, and Prabhupada had his apartment 1 or 2 flights up. 1 flight up? 2 flights up, right? Anyway, 2 flights up? Probably.
1 flight.
1 flight up.
For those who haven't seen, we should go out the hallway, the courtyard, 3 windows.
And Prabhupada used to come down from his apartment. There'd be kirtan, and then a second kirtan would begin, and Prabhupada would come down through this door. There'd be a dais. This is earlier than when I came. I think it was like this. Later there was a kind of higher dais, blue. And Prabhupada would sit. He would lead kirtan.
A dive project.
And then he would speak. And I don't know how much of it I understood, but Prabhupada was certainly an impressive figure. He was effulgent. That I saw right away. He was visibly effulgent. And he was grave. When he would speak, he spoke in the manner of a person with a serious message to convey. It wasn't the fluffy stuff that was floating around everywhere. It wasn't feel good. Or it wasn't vague mysticism. Prabhupada was speaking of something scientific, as he said, and practical. And at the same time, there were rules. And I'd read that about that. It sounded very austere, but in practice, it wasn't as austere as it sounded. Maybe you might want to ask something about 26 Second Avenue or my time here. We stayed here, it didn't seem like so long before we moved to 61 Second Avenue. They were looking for a place, but then they put their energy into renovating this place. And then it seemed like because of that, they got the next place. They tried to do something, and Krishna reciprocated. Did you want to ask something? Because there's just...
Why did we move? Why did we move?
This place is small. There's no residential accommodations here, apart from Prabhupada's apartment. There's no kitchen. we were living in little apartments in the neighborhood. In those days, you could get a cheap apartment for between $20 and $60 a month. Of course, you shared it with the cockroaches. But that's where the devotees were living. They were living in the neighborhood. Brahmacharya ashram, two devotees here, devotees there. 61 2nd Avenue actually was glorious. It had a big temple room behind the altar, which was constructed there. Oh, Hare Krishna. Behind the altar, there was well, under the altar practically was the Brahmacharya ashram. We lived like right behind and even under the altar, right behind it. Constructed bunk beds and all of that. There was room for showers and so on. There was a big kitchen space, and there was room for a prasadam hall for the devotees next to the kitchen. It was really big by our, for us, it's a big step up, and so it enabled us to grow and to all be there and serve the deities. Radha Krishna were there and could up the standard. So it was considered quite, they'd been looking for, now it's like 26 2nd Avenue, it's a place to die for. But for us, it was just, this is what we got. It's a small little corner. When can we move out and move to a bigger place? We weren't sentimentally attached to 26 2nd Avenue by any means. So then we got 61 2nd Avenue, but we kept Prabhupada's apartment. And Prabhupada, when he came to New York, would stay in his apartment. And Prabhupada would, usually Prabhupada came in the summer. If you look at Prabhupada's schedule, his intelligent schedule, he would come and be in New York in the summer months, and he would be, say, in California and other times, and so, and also stepwise moving. So he came typically once a year. After the beginning, when he was here all the time, then they, it started to develop. There was Montreal, there was Detroit, there was London, there was Paris, and Prabhupada wanted to do something in India. So he was traveling around the world. But he would come once a month typically. And when he came, devotees would come from all over the East Coast, because he couldn't visit all those little places. Or if he did, it would be very brief if he visited a place. So devotees would converge here. And I got my second initiation. My first initiation I got here. Prabhupada sat like around where you are. And there was a fire yajna. This was kind of the place that Prabhupada personally did the initiation. Building a fire. And a simple thing, we didn't have all that elaborate gear that later was introduced from South India. Simple thing. Prabhupada gave me initiation then, and at 2nd Avenue, 61, I got second initiation. Jayadvaita, me, several others. At the time I was initiated, there was no second initiation. It hadn't been heard of yet. But then he introduced it. He gave second initiation to a few select people, the Brahmins, the Brahmanandas, that's true. So, then he opened it up and everybody could get second initiation. I forget who else was at that initiation, but I remember Jayadvaita being there. Radha Krishna, the small Radha Krishna who you've seen at Skarmahorti Warren Street were installed here. In fact, the same day I was initiated. So, that's the difference between me and Krishna. I was initiated, he was installed.
What was the date, Maharaj? The date, Maharaj?
It's in my computer, but I can't remember. In fact, I'd forgotten entirely. But apart from my initiation, Balai Dasi and Jayadvaita Prabhu, the press manager we talked about earlier, were married here at the same occasion. And Hansadutta and Himavati were already married, but they had their spiritual marriage here. So I'd forgotten the date, but I asked Balai Dasi, and of course she knew, because a woman always remembers the day when she was married. So now I have it written down.
1968?
1968. And of course I thought that basically all the action had already passed. You know, those days when the devotees were living with Prabhupada and he was always present. Now things, you know, was not like that anymore. So I figured I'd missed all the action. You know, 1968. There was, in fact, I remember about Radha Krishna that there'd been a shipment of things that had been sent. Harmonium, I think, and some kartals and the deities. I think perhaps Srila Narayan Maharaj had sent those things. And so then Radha Krishna, Himavati stayed up making clothes for them and wigs for them and so on. And then they were installed at that ceremony also. The four of us were initiated. Anyway, we've talked about that before. Yeah. Yes.
Marsha, in the time you were here, and also Prabhupada would be here, what would be a day like with Prabhupada in those days?
Well, we weren't all hanging out with. It's hard to think sometimes about what we were doing here at 26 2nd Avenue. You know, in the course of a day, what exactly did we accomplish? Because there was no Harinam Sankirtan, there was no book distribution. Somehow or other, we were kept engaged doing different kinds of service. With Prabhupada, of course, he would give class in the evenings. Sometimes he would give class in the mornings, it seems to me. But basically he gave class in the evening. That's what I remember. 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And he would, and on the off nights he would meet with us in his room. And we would have informal time with him and could ask questions. Sometimes he'd talk about something, philosophy, sometimes he'd talk about British history. Why is he talking about British? Talk about what he wanted to talk about. But we would relish his transcendental company. He would have exchanges with devotees. Oh, Madan Mohan is looking like Lord Buddha. And Prabhupada would, you know, if you wanted, I think I'm really fuzzy, I have to tell you. Some people have brilliant memories. You know, they remember every detail, and I tend to be quite the opposite, vague and fading more by the day. But Prabhupada would call for Brahmananda or Prabhupada. One time Prabhupada called for me or no, he didn't call for me, but I was with Prabhupada. Maybe Hansadutta, there were a couple of us. Prabhupada he'd gotten that harmonium and he wanted to play something, and he had us play kartals. So, simple thing, but Prabhupada would be just doing kirtan, and he called for us. He would lead kirtan himself in the evening before the class. He would always chant the entire Mangal Charana. Always chant the entire Mangala Charana. Very slowly, actually, and with great depth and feeling. You could, it was palpable. It wasn't just a performance, or it wasn't just a sing-along. But Prabhupada would begin by offering obeisances to his Guru Maharaj and all the members of the Parampara, all Mangal Charana Prabhupada chant. Which took, a fair amount of time. And then he would lead Hare Krishna Kirtan. And anyway, the Kirtan book, I've told how we did it very slow and building up. Before I go further, Hare Krishna, Mahaprabhu.
Hare Krishna.
We've moved in on your program, so but I want to respect what you're doing. So you please tell me what your direction is.
Well, I'm blessed to.
Before you go on, this is Atmanivedana Prabhu. He and his wife Shubhi have been steadily doing programs here at 26 Second Avenue.
Over 14 years. 14 years.
14 years.
Wow.
So,
15 as of January.
15 as of January.
So Maharaj, it seems like this is pretty ecstatic. So I guess I'm not familiar with a plan in the event that you have a plan, but if you do, please let me know, and probably sounds great.
You mean just keep going?
Yes. Great. And so I guess I would suggest this, so you can keep going as Krishna inspires you, and the devotees may ask you more. And we can have kirtan at one point. We also have prasadam at one point. Oh, although maybe not for like 75 devotees, but Krishna can make things work. So yeah.
Okay.
We can have snacks.
I've told the story. Well, some of the devotees who were here at that time, Vamandev I've mentioned, Alai Dasi, very dear God sister, she was here. Jayadvaita Prabhu, who was studying or working to learn printing. Uddhava, another devotee, same story. There's another God sister, Kanchan Bala, who's been steady also, like Alai Dasi since those days. Who eventually married Madhusudan. Madhusudan was the first person put in charge of me, sort of clean me up and engage me. And I used to hit him with questions all the time. If it says this on page 2, why does it say that on page 7? And if the Swami says this, then why does he say that? And if this, then why that? And some of them he could answer, and some of them he couldn't. But he was very kind, and a wonderful devotee. His Kanchan Bala was, I think, a high school student. There were 3 or 5 high school girls who would come for the programs in the evenings steadily. Kanchan Bala, Sudarshana, Indira Nekayani, and like that, a few. No, Bhurishan Prabhu was joined in Buffalo, but he came sometimes and visited. There were many devotees who joined in Buffalo under Rupanuga Prabhu. Quite a stellar list, actually, of names you would know, because he was preaching at the University of Buffalo. Very successful program. He was one of the pillars of the early movement. Satsar Maharaj was already in Boston. Hamsadutta and his wife Himavati were here. Purushottam, here's Brahmananda's right-hand man, another devotee, Devananda. And in that way, Nanda Kishore. There were quite a number of Jairam, who's still in this area of New Jersey. They were all here, and everybody was doing something active. Bhaktajan, who's still around. It's hard to tell exactly what we were doing. We would be busy till noontime, then there'd be lunch, and then Brahmananda would sort of close the curtains of the front, and they would roll out one of these carpets, and then it was time for quite a good piece of rest. Brahmananda Prabhu, I think, leading the program. And he was very devoted to Srila Prabhupada, very capable also. Prabhupada entrusted 26 Second Avenue to him. He's the original temple president. And he did quite the job of keeping everything together and keeping everything happening and keeping the devotees working together, or at least not killing one another. There were a couple who didn't quite have the chemistry with one another. But Brahmananda, and very, everything ran on Krishna consciousness. We didn't know that much, but we knew that you were supposed to be Krishna conscious, and that if you were Krishna conscious, and Krishna was in the center of everything, then that was the secret, to be always. In fact, there was a little embroidered sign, at least at 61 Second Avenue, made by Balaidasi's mother. Said, if you have no service to do, then chant or read scripture. If you're always engaged in Krishna consciousness, then you can't fall into Maya. That kind of summed it up. We were busy doing something or other, and if we weren't busy, then we should chant or read scripture, or otherwise we would fall into Maya. Yes.
I got here late, so I might have missed this, but what was the morning program like at that time?
The morning program began, trying to remember whether it was 7 o'clock or something like that. 7 or maybe a little later. There would be kirtan, and then we would read something, Srimad Bhagavatam. The first canto was there, and we would comment on it. We would give a little class. Brahmananda used to give class. The most brilliant class giver was Rai Rama, who later spectacularly crashed, but who at that time was brilliant. He was the editor of Teachings of Lord Chaitanya's, another work. So he knew the philosophy to the extent that anyone knew it quite well, and he was well spoken and persuasive. He could put together. He was very good at answering questions. Also, I think I got a lot of conviction by hearing things that he spoke. So there'd be kirtan, and we'd speak something, and probably again little short kirtan. We would chant the Nisringa prayers responsively, just word by word. No one knew a tune or anything, and there was only the one prayer, Tavakara Kamala, and it was introduced as a prayer for Swamiji's health. And we would chant Tava, Tava, Krada, Krada, like that. That's how it was chanted. And some of the devotees were better at speaking, some. And after a little while, they asked me to speak something. I remember after my first, I gave a talk, and you know, a lot of the talks were just what you'd memorized from the Happening album. The transcendental vibration established by the chanting of Hare Krishna. You know, you could do the better part of a lecture by things that you picked up from that 8-minute talk. But then also from the Bhagavatam and so on. And we knew some basic principles. It was like a sort of a saying at every lecture. You have to say, you're not this body. Life is meant for spiritual realization. Accept the bona fide spiritual master. Chant Hare Krishna. And Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You know, a formula like that. If you touch that, you hit all the bases. Or touched all the bases. I remember after I gave my first talk, Ray Rama gave me the feedback that we just try to repeat what Swamiji says. Because I'd taken some of the ideas and just given my own examples, and you know, that's what you do. If you're giving a talk, you just explain things in your own words. But he called me aside and said, we just try to repeat what Swamiji says. In other words, don't speculate and do all this creative head work. Just repeat. So it was a good lesson for me from the beginning. We'd have a simple breakfast. Like, it seems to me it would be like oatmeal or something like that, or cereal, with gulab jamun juice, sort of as long as it lasted after Sunday, you know. And then we would begin our whatever kind of service it was. Some devotees would be cooking for lunch, some devotees would be working on this or that. My work was to assist Ray Rama up in the publication office. He had a flat up 6th Street. I gave Rama the address. And typing. That was my first real engagement, was typing. Back to Godhead. Some devotees would go around to the head shops, and you know what a head shop is? No. This whole area, next door it was a gas station, and this whole area, Lower East Side, was all hippies. This is 1968. So 1967, 1966, but especially 67, 68. This was the time for the hippies. It didn't last all that long. You know, you speak of the 60s, everybody thinks hippies. But really the whole hippie thing didn't last more than a couple of years. But while it lasted, this was the center of it for the East Coast. St. Mark's Place was sort of, which is 6th Street, was sort of the center of the action. And the place was full of people high on everything you can imagine. And living in these $20, $30 flats and wasting their life. And everybody had a philosophy back then. The people who were living on the street were actually people coming from good families, educated, not the people that today would be vagrants. And everybody had a philosophy. I'm God, or you're God, or everything is God, or God is a light, God is a this, God is a that, or whatever it was. And they'd all come by here, or many would come by here, and they'd speak like sages with whatever they had. They'd ask questions. And again, the devotees would be pretty good at knocking down their ideas. But it was all hippie loca here. Bells and beads and headbands and bell-bottom jeans and that sort of garb. And there were a couple of shops that catered to the needs of the hippies by selling cigarette papers for rolling joints and pipes, hubble bubbles, and weird things to look at while you were high on whatever, and spiritual publications. And among the spiritual publications, Our Back to Godhead would be there. So devotees would be going around to the head shops and so on, introducing BTG. And the evening, whether Prabhupada was here or not, especially Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we would have kirtan, and people would come. Is that okay, Basudev?
Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me?
Who knows? He asked the question in the morning program.
Oh, it was good question.
So,
Yeah, that was our morning program, more or less. Yeah.
Maharaj, by this time, how was the fund being generated?
Oh. Brahmananda was working as a school teacher. At some point, he resigned, but up to some point, he was getting money like that. Advaita and Uddhava were learning printing, but also getting some money from that. We would take up a pitiful collection at the classes. And
Sasru Marsh was one of the principal givers.
yeah, by the time I came, he'd left,
Okay.
and he was supporting the Boston Center, working as a social worker.
Sasru Marsh recently he revealed something very interesting, that Jadharani had been sent up there and Brahmananda called to demand that they send the money from Boston to New York, because he considered that they're New York devotees and they're doing it on behalf of New York. And Sasru Marsh was kind of like, but then Jadharani took the phone and said, "This is our money and we're not going to give you any money. You get your own money."
Gargamuni was sometimes here, and he was very good at generating money. Probably we called him Gargamuni. He started an incense business here, just buying some punks, and dipping them in oils and packaging them. It eventually became a very big business, Spiritual Sky Scented Products, which had its headquarters in Los Angeles. Prabhupada even mentions it in a purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita, I think. It was a very good business. Gargamuni had a touch, Lakshmi liked him. He was very good at business. And somehow or other money came. Sometimes when you really needed it, just somehow or other it would come. We were never rich, but Krishna always supplied. That was our experience. Someone would cover this, someone would cover that, someone would join and give something. So even though we weren't very systematic with raising funds, but money would come. Prabhupada said Krishna's the financier, and he was. There was really no, like I remember in Boston there was some incident, Satsuru Maharaj had mentioned it, that they were in serious need of, I forget how many hundreds of dollars, which was big money back then, for something, rent payment or mortgage payment or something. And like the day of the crisis, an envelope appeared in the mailbox with exactly the right amount. In fact, I remember Brahmananda was also business-minded, so you were supposed to get beads, which were then like hardware store beads, not hardware store beads. Yeah. You string them yourself, and that's what it was. and they cost, $5 or something. And Brahmananda wasn't gonna just give them away. And I was living uptown a little bit, not uptown, 5 blocks or 7 blocks uptown from here, living with my cousin in one of those very inexpensive flats. And Brahmananda said, that you should get beads. And the next day when I came to the temple in the morning for the morning program, as I stopped to cross the street at one intersection, there was like a $5 bill sitting there, as if, like placed. So it was quite persuasive, So things like that would happen, that you could feel that we felt that Krishna was helping us, that everything was happening by the mercy of Krishna, even though we didn't have, and in one sense it was better that way. There was no systematic income, there was no, treasury where you can count it up and at the end you know what you'd have for the month. We would just be going, as they say, by the seat of our pants, just doing it, and somehow money was always there. We would scare up some money for the Sunday feast, which I've talked about before. Be like 14 items or more for the Sunday feast, all of them opulent. So that was a great devotee maker, of course. But money was always there, in short supply. And Prabhupada was very strict about money. In the article I'd first read, one of the accounts was that one of the stories was that there was one of Prabhupada's students was a college professor, at Greenville, of course, and he asked Prabhupada for, 5 or 10 cents for a postage stamp, and Prabhupada grilled him about why he needed this postage stamp. I thought, oh my goodness. That's when from that account, I got the whole article, I got the sense that Prabhupada was the real thing, he was a strict teacher. He wasn't just playing games here. But whoa, do I want to let myself in for something like that? But he was strict. In fact, people would come to him for money, for to buy this or to buy that. And Prabhupada said, he was the treasurer, but he would say, "Oh, you should not ask the spiritual master for money." Yes.
Maharaj, on this topic, it seems like one point I think you're making is that a focus was more on spreading Krishna consciousness and then let the money come, as distinct from reversing the order of those two items, because of course one needs money in order to do things. And if I'm understanding that correctly, that's part of your point, at least maybe indirectly, then would you say, if that's right, then would you say that changed for Srila Prabhupada after the 26 Second Avenue days over the next 10 years or so that he's teaching?
Well, I don't think it was just that we didn't care about money. We were just preaching, but we did have the conviction that money would come. And there were people like Brahmananda who were definitely, we have a rent check on such and such date, and how are we going to pay for it? So it's not that we were just sort of cruising along and not aware of money, but there was this sort of confidence that because we're serving Krishna, Krishna will provide. And that's still there wherever devotees want it to be there. Otherwise it cannot be there. We just rely on, what should we say, plans and formulas and okay, we're covering the expense, the budget we're within the budget and so on, and so our business is done. We're on time, we're within budget, we're not preaching much, but the accounts balance. So there was definitely a missionary sense there, which can become a little weaker when all the package is just laid out before you, and perhaps your service gets covered by a stipend, and everybody knows what everything is, and it's all neatly tied up. There was this uncertainty about things, which helped us, I think, remain dependent on Krishna. And it's, where that is, and you can't run something like ISKCON Bombay on that kind of ISKCON Juhu on that kind of basis. Of, you've got a serious institution there, and Prabhupada wanted it run like a serious institution. When he was very much demanding that the accounts be properly kept. If you talk to Tejas Prabhu, who was the temple president of Delhi in the early days, Prabhupada would be like, if there was a rupee discrepancy in the accounts, then you had to go back and find where that rupee went. Prabhupada was very, very particular about it. So he wasn't a bohemian or sentimentalist. He wanted things organized and serious, but he also wanted us to be enterprising and to depend on Krishna, that as he was, that you could go anywhere and Krishna would help us. Not that unless you're sent a monthly sum, you can't preach. It's your business to just go and depend on Krishna and try, and Krishna will help. We were selling magazines that didn't bring in a lot of money, but one way or another. Damodar was another early devotee. I think he must have been contributing something because he was working. Somehow or other, we've all come together. Prabhupada was concerned sometimes about opulence. I remember there was a story from Los Angeles. Jayashree had made that coat for Srila Prabhupada or not made, but given that coat with the peacock feather tassels. Someone had given Prabhupada a gold lame bead bag. And New Dwarka was named New Dwarka because it was very opulent compared to, what we had in New York. And Prabhupada one day was sitting on his bed, he said, now we are getting so many things. So I'm just praying to Krishna that I may not fall down. Was there another question? Yes.
I was wondering about kind of like 26 Second Avenue being in the hands of devotees and what that kind of looked like, what the timeline looked like. So, like when Srila Prabhupada was here, and then you moved up to 66 Second Avenue, and then you let this place go, or not?
As soon as we got 61 Second Avenue, we relinquished 26. It would have meant paying 2 rents. And we didn't need 26 Second Avenue. We had a place that was many times bigger and had much more facility. So again, we weren't thinking, how could we ever abandon 26 Second Avenue? Now it's like a sacred place of pilgrimage. Then it was just a place that we were renting that we didn't need anymore.
So how many years were devotees here at 26 Second Avenue?
Do you know the timeline, Ram Roy?
July 1966. It happened during 1968, the move, or did it happen in 1969? There's that Damodar black and white movie Swamiji, which shows the ecstatic chanting and dancing in a tuxedo parlor. It shows your initiation. And
The tuxedo parlor was 61.
Yeah.
I was initiated here.
Oh, there was an initiation in that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
My sense is that it was like right on the end of 68, beginning of 69,
Right.
that we moved to 61. And yes, it was an old tuxedo parlor, and so when we were renovating the place, there were all these old, dusty, falling apart top hats and cummerbunds and all of that kind of stuff, with which we were having a good time while we were doing the renovation.
There's the memoir of Rukmini Mataji that everyone was telling Prabhupada before he came in. Prabhupada, the new place is so wonderful. It's a palace. And Rukmini was thinking, you know, they didn't really disclose the whole truth. It's a palace, but it's a tuxedo palace. And it's a storefront, maybe a little nicer, but it's not a palace. And she was thinking Prabhupada would be very displeased. And then Prabhupada's arrival, you can see the footage, triumphant in the airport, and then coming in, leading this incredible kirtan, and Rukmini is saying, Krishna has sent me so many beautiful moonlight boys and girls. And it just kind of melted her heart. And Prabhupada was not displeased. He was very
No.
happy.
And the place was, you know, for us, it was super opulent. It had mirrors on all sides, and wood paneling, which we were buffing up and so on. So it was, in that sense, opulent. Prabhupada's asana was a kind of inset into the wall, and it was a little closer. You sort of had to be careful that he wouldn't bump his head there, but you know, mirrors behind him, because it was all. And Narayan was called from Los Angeles because he was a good carpenter and builder, and you know, Vishwakarma, he could build anything. So we renovated it, and yes, Prabhupada, it was, I mean, for us, you look at this space, that space was, just the temple room was considerably larger than this, and we had living space, and we had a big kitchen, and we had a prasadam room.
You had 2 floors, 2 levels, or just one?
You walked up one level, we had,
That was the space.
Yeah.
And it was deep all the way to the back.
yeah, it went all the way back. If I went there now, I might look at it and say, my God, what a small place.
It's
But
now,
my memory of it was that it was, for us, it was quite a big thing. We knew it was a disadvantage that it was one flight up. People couldn't just walk in, but that was a trade-off for getting so much facility. There was a big initiation there. I've told this before, but again in the summer, and Prabhupada did a big initiation there. And then he's walking back to his apartment here at 26. And there's a picture in one of the old on-chanting publications. Maybe some of you might have seen it. It's outside towards 61 2nd Avenue, and devotees are all jumping up and down, and big kirtan, black and white picture. And everybody, you know, some people aren't wearing shoes, they're just in ecstasy and walking with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada didn't say anything then. Prabhupada, I was near him, I heard him say, you know, he's holding his head up as he often did, said, we have increased the disciplic succession from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Evo.
Yes.
Raj, would you say that the way that Srila Prabhupada would give class, what he would talk about and how he would talk, would you say that it varied from when he was first giving classes here at 22 2nd Avenue and 61, but then, you know, later on when you were also spending time with Srila Prabhupada in the later 70s?
Did Prabhupada's classes differ over time from when he started at 26 2nd Avenue, and then later, and then still later? there's a sameness in the sense that he's always grave, he's always speaking from Bhagavatam, he's always following the system of unpacking the verse, unpacking the words of the verse. He's always speaking strongly, he's never compromising, he's never pussyfooting, lays it on the line. He's always very strongly pushing Krishna consciousness. In that sense, that was constant. Looking back at the classes before I arrived, looking at the transcripts or hearing them, my sense is that he was, in the very beginning, speaking on a much higher platform, because those earlier classes were from Chaitanya Charitamrita. And so there was a sort of high level to them, not that he was talking about Raskata and all of that, but sort of, sometimes very technical, but quite advanced. Like if you read Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, that's quite an advanced text, and that came out. That's the first book published after Prabhupada's arrival as Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which was, a deep text. A lot of teachings to Rupa Goswami, teachings to Sanatana Goswami, discussions with Ramananda Roy. These are advanced topics. And that's what Prabhupada was speaking about in 1966, 1967. These very exalted topics. Again, not just confidential all the time, but would you say a real science, advanced. And my sense is that over time, he, I don't know if it's fair to say, but maybe that he got more of a sense of what kind of audience he had, and perhaps lowered his expectations. That's just my sense, but yeah. And that after that there were like certain themes that he really wanted to drill into us. And that was certainly there throughout, that there's Prabhupada, one time there was a meeting in Boston with his early editors and a few other devotees. Prabhupada began by saying that we have Siddhanta, we have a conclusion or set of conclusions, and the editors have to know those conclusions. And Prabhupada really drilled those things into us. The things that he really wanted us to know, he said again and again, that you're not this body, you're not this body. Life is not meant for sense gratification. We have to control the mind, we have to control the senses. We always have to surrender to Krishna, depend on Krishna. There were certain siddhantas that again and again and again Prabhupada would speak on. Again and again and again, whatever the topic might be. But there were always these essential understandings that I remember there was a Ratha Yatra in San Francisco. This is rather late, perhaps 1975. And devotees had invited some leading politicians in the city to speak before Prabhupada spoke. They were both, as I recall, running for office. I forget which office. And one guy spoke and said something about cultural diversity in the city, and mostly his talk, short talk, 5 minutes. Mostly it was re-elect me, or elect me the first time. And then the other fellow spoke, and he said pretty much the same thing, but he'd gone into Bhagavad Gita. He'd read something of Bhagavad Gita, so he mentioned Krishna, he mentioned the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, and then, and elect me. And then it was Prabhupada's turn to speak, and I was listening very keenly, because here are these two politicians, and they both, put their cards on the table, as it were. And how is Prabhupada going to respond to what they've said? And Prabhupada began and said, so, as I have given the example many times, that just as one has to pour water on the root of the tree, and the water will be distributed to all the leaves and branches, or just as one has to put food in the stomach, and the energy will be distributed to all the limbs of the body, so we simply have to engage in the service of Krishna, and everything we need will be there. And he didn't say anything about what the politicians had said. They might as well not have been there. He didn't respond, he didn't bounce off it, he didn't knock anything or praise anything or compliment anyone. He just ignored them totally. So he had something he wanted to say. One time Prabhupada arrived here from Honolulu. And Prabhupada said that in the Honolulu Advertiser, the local paper, they had printed an article that the Swami is a small man, but he has got a big message. Prabhupada liked that. Prabhupada liked that. Yes, we've got a big message. So that was the consistent thing that I saw in Prabhupada's teachings, that he was very grave, that he was very much aware of his duty as a representative of the sampradaya, of the parampara, to speak the science of Krishna, and very keen on having us understand it. So, in that sense, I'd say he was, there was a consistency. Yeah. Okay. When I first came, Prabhupada was speaking on Prahlad Maharaj, by the way. He gave a whole series of talks on Prahlad Maharaj. And later he spoke about Rishabdev up in Boston. Yes, I'm going to go.
Thank you for spending time with us, and very nice, whatever you have been doing, so nice. So one of the question is, Maharaj, today, of course, ISKCON has established and very successful. Now, 40 years back, when, of course, Prabhupada had that vision that only time is separating from what's happening. And from your personal perspective, Maharaj, what you envision that, okay, it's going to happen 40 years after, and today when you go back, when you reconcile both the thought, the vision, and the reality, what is that today, did that met the expectations, beyond the expectations, or you feel
Oh,
like
way beyond that. Did what later happened in the Krishna consciousness movement. Were we sort of expecting that to happen? No, we weren't. I remember Ray Rama telling me that one time he came to see Prabhupada, and if you go through the next door, which was the door that leads to the apartments, each mailbox has a buzzer, and each buzzer has next to it the name of the occupant. And by Prabhupada's buzzer it said International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And Ray Rama chuckled about it, like, what international society? It's just the Swami and a few boys here at 2nd Avenue. What is this international society? I one time said to Satsvarup Maharaj, some time ago, I was recalling that we thought that Krishna consciousness would never go past the hippies. The hippies were the only ones who would get it, the straight people. Yeah, they were so straight, how could We'd never get it. So even Prabhupada himself one time said the hippies are our best customers. So I said to Satsuru Maharaj, we thought it would never go beyond the hippies. And Satsuru Maharaj sort of took it a step further. He said, we didn't want it to go past the hippies. If the straight people got it, they would ruin everything. It would be like normal religion and all of that. So he said that, we really didn't, and it was true. When he said it, it struck a chord that we didn't bother reaching out to the straight people because they wouldn't get it. And if they got it, they would mess it up. So it was sort of to be kept in our own little culture, the hippie subculture. But no, certainly we didn't envision anything like, huge temples all over the world and a 55th Street skyscraper, as Prabhupada called it, or Mayapur, Vrindavan, and all that. No, when we were here, therefore it was glorious that we got this bigger place at 61 2nd Avenue. That was big. And even that they got the church in Los Angeles, that was like, wow, it was a huge thing. And gradually we started growing and so on and so on. But no, we had no idea, even distributing books, or like distributing magazines, that we could go past, how do you, Prabhupada he was writing to Ray Rama, we want this to be like Time or Life in the matter of its popularity. And we're selling a few copies at the head shops. So how does this happen? Then Prabhupada had to start, remember, we just used to go like once a week to Tompkins Square Park. That was it for Kirtan. And then Prabhupada told us we should go every day. That even the press workers should go out for an hour a day. And when we did that, that really had a huge change. We became very visible. We were very engaged. We were very purified by chanting. An hour, 2 hours, 4 hours. And Prabhupada said that when we went out for Kirtan, we should distribute the Back to Godheads. He said any gentleman will give a quarter, 25 cents. So that became a big deal, and we would ask people for money. We had conch shells, and we would ask people to put money in the conch shell. I have a professional photo to prove it from a photographer who was working with Village Voice. So money was coming a little bit, and we were distributing magazines, and then Prabhupada said when the books were published that we should sell Bhagavad Gita on Kirtan, which was inconceivable to us. That was a lot more than a quarter. But gradually that started happening. And actually our big success was, the turning point you could say was first Harinam and then book distribution. This made a huge difference in our movement. Till then we were like, what are we doing all day? Like if you asked me what were we doing, I don't know, somehow, we were doing something, but I can't remember what. But later I remember we were on Fifth Avenue for hours at a time. We would go out there literally for hours, starting at 42nd Street, Public Library on Fifth Avenue, going up to 59th Street, Columbus Circle, coming back down, going back up, and just during all the seasons. December we would still be going out, chanting Hare Krishna, with runny noses and whatever, but we would be going out there. So that became made a big difference. Then people, were very visible between Oxford Street in London and Fifth Avenue in New York. people saw us everywhere, you know. Wherever I go, I see you people. They thought there were hundreds of us. No, literally, they thought there were hundreds of us because wherever they would go, they would see us. It was just a small band going out to Fifth Avenue, but you know, if you paid some publicity company and say, you know, we're a small group of people with a sort of unusual philosophy and we want to get ourselves out there before the public eye, who would come up with something like, well, just chant Hare Krishna and dance on Fifth Avenue, dressed in like this, and shave your heads and give out magazines and books. You know, they would never say that. Now that'll turn people up. You know, but it was huge. It was huge. We got to meet people, and we gave out so many cards with the Maha Mantra, and we had prasadam. I talked about this with a few of the devotees we were with today. There was something called the luglu by us, which was a bundi ladu of exceeding opulence. They were made with dates and almonds and raisins and all sorts of dried fruits and a lot of ghee and a lot of sugar. And one devotee, Indra Pramada Prabhu, was a professional designer. He designed a little label, and we gave out thousands and thousands of those along with the kirtan party. And it became, you know, like Tirupati Ladu and Tirupati or other kinds of signature, but that was our signature prasadam. Then people would meet us and ask us if we had any with us and so on. So we were distributing prasadam, we were chanting Hare Krishna up and down Fifth Avenue, premier street in the world, and distributing books. That was a later development. First there was chanting, then the books came, and Prabhupada gave so much importance to the books. And as Vaisheshika Prabhu said, it became our family business. And my own experience was that if you tried to do something without book distribution, it would be a struggle. But if you distributed books, you get men, you get money, you get everything. Everything comes when we distribute books, because that's the most important way for glorifying Krishna. We're the Kirtan movement, Sankirtan movement, and this is the bigger Sankirtan, Brihat Mrinanga. So when we beat on that Brihat Mrinanga, when we not only chant Hare Krishna but distribute books, huge impact, huge impact. Everything works when we do that. Without that, everything can be a real struggle. But when we're distributing books, glorifying Krishna, everything comes. So Harinam, hugely important, chanting Kartals and Mrinanga, and then along with that, Prabhupada introduced from very early on, try to do, along with that, distribute books. Hugely. And then now it's, you know, now it's become huge. But no, we weren't expecting it. Not at all. Spoke on the radio in the early days and in Boston, and at the end, sort of at the sign-off point, he said that, and we'd like to invite everyone, invite everyone to come to Boston, everyone in Boston to come to our Sunday feast. And the announcer said to him, what would you do if everyone came? So Satsrup Maharaj sent a letter to Sri, in a letter to Prabhupada, asked him, this is what he said, what should I have said? And Prabhupada said, let them come. The problem is that they don't come. If they come, we'll feed the whole world. The problem is that they're not coming. So, yes, we can feed the whole world. We have no shortage. Prabhupada many times said that. Krishna is the financier. We have no shortage. One time there was Prabhupada was emphasizing book distribution so much, he said just leave one person at the temple, one pujari to serve the deities, and everyone else can go out. So that's what devotees were doing. Even, I remember Chicago especially, for some reason, they had just super, ultra, unbelievably opulent prasadam in the morning. And then everybody would go out and distribute books, and that'd be good for the day. But anyway, some temple managers got the idea, well, okay, for the Sunday feast, we'll leave one person behind. And, we'll cook some, make some puris and some halava, and that's it. But when Prabhupada heard about it, he said, no, it should be opulent. And, along those lines of 10 or 14 or however many preparations. So he didn't want us to skimp that way. So, yes.
Maharaj, it's very inspiring. You're explaining the activities that we're developing under as Srila Prabhupada presided over the devotees here, and once the Harinam and the book distribution as that developed, then everything came, and Srila Prabhupada really pushed it, and devotees really got into it, so to speak. And so my understanding, hearing from you, is you were also providing some instruction that not only was this the theme that at the time when Srila Prabhupada would emphasize book distribution, Harinam, then everything would come. But I felt like you were instructing that this is a fact, regardless of when and where. And so my question for you is, there can be a philosophy that if one accepts it as true, then it should be true regardless of time, place, and circumstances. And yet, there's different ways to implement, to follow, if you accept a precept of what's right and what's wrong, there's different ways that one can live according to that, to what's right and wrong. So my question for you is, could you please elaborate and explain philosophically why what I understood that you said is a fact? Why is that a fact? In other words, why is it that this spiritual movement back in the late 60s and early 70s, why is it that then, once book distribution and Harinam Sankirtan became prominent, that the devotees understood that everything would come therefrom? Why is it that that's a fact philosophically then and now?
Well, that's a big topic, of course. One reason is pragmatic. Prabhupada was business-minded. In fact, one time, at that same editorial meeting, Sesrimaj, I think, asked if we could add more pages to the magazine. And Prabhupada said, why? And Sesrimaj said, well, we could have more articles. The reader will get more for his money. Prabhupada said, yes. He said, but we should be a little business-minded. He said, they should get less. But just pragmatically speaking, you print books and sell them, you get money. That's just practical. It's, as Prabhupada said, it's a good business. But at the same time, it ventilates, to use Prabhupada's word, the glories of Krishna, which is our mission. So you're doing two things at once. You're accomplishing your main purpose of glorifying Krishna, and you're getting money at the same time. So therefore, Prabhupada called it our family business. And he wasn't happy, by the way, when devotees went into other lines of business, when they decided that, instead of selling books, we could sell paintings, we could sell records, we could sell beach towels, we could sell this, we could sell that. Yes, we must get a beach No, Prabhupada didn't like that at all. Yeah, but to give another angle, it's not exactly that the same way of doing things works everywhere, or is what Prabhupada had us do everywhere. When the devotees went to India, Prabhupada changed the script entirely. He said, for a while the devotees were doing kirtan as they were doing here in New York City. And after some time, Prabhupada said that in India this would be regarded as like a sentimental sort of thing, we're another one of those groups that goes around and sings bhajans. We're not very important. And he directed instead that we should put our energy into making life members, which meant approaching the leading members of the society, those who were well-to-do, those who were the leaders of industry and business, and also political leaders and celebrities and so on, and enlist them as life members, which was also good business, and which engaged important people in the Krishna consciousness movement in a way that going out and distributing books or going out and chanting didn't do on its own. And in the life membership program, the people would get the books. That was a prime benefit or purpose, was that the life members should not just give money and give some token, but they should get the books and they should make advancements in spiritual life also. So Prabhupada very much took a different angle. There are different atmospheres, different circumstances, and so Prabhupada didn't just say, well, this is what we do and take it or leave it. He had different approaches. Sometimes they'd be innovative, sometimes they would just be what he knew would work in a different place, and sometimes it would be stressing on the things that we were already doing and that he wanted us to do and that we should do more of. So he wasn't stereotyped or limited. He had different ideas, and he aimed at establishing this movement very, very solidly. Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Farm communities, among other things. Yes.
Sorry if I'm asking out of
Go ahead.
context question, but since the preaching came to the picture, I just want to mention 1960s and 70s, Srila Prabhupada and you all, the preaching went very well, and then there's so many locals started taking up Krishna consciousness. So because it's been here for so many generations, you can see. So what are we missing here? Why we're not able to preach to locals?
Why are we not able to preach to locals? We are able to preach to locals. That is to say, why are most of our people coming to our temples Indian, Asian Indians, and not Americans or British or what have you? We are able to preach to them, and there's, in my estimation, greater interest and receptivity than ever among young or older, actually, Americans and Europeans. But it's easier to preach to Indians. You just scratch the surface and you've got a devotee. You have this marvelous community of pious, exceedingly pious, receptive, interested, intelligent, capable people with good income and good, everything you could ask for. So when they're here, why should we divert our attention toward a batch of scruffy Americans? And so, where we're putting, what is it? attention goes, energy flows. That's another Vaisheshika Prabhu aphorism. So you give your attention toward the Indian community, you'll get more Indians. And especially once you get some Indians, you'll get more Indians. And that's wonderful. But if you're complacent or just satisfied with that, that's all you'll do, and you'll forget the other people. But when you start something for the Americans and Europeans, they'll take great interest. And just in our local experience, for example, these, Lotus Room, Bhakti School that we've started in Brooklyn. Just, what does it do? It just carves out a little corner and says, okay, this is for the rest of you guys. And it fills up with interested, inquisitive, intelligent people who come and keep coming and keep coming. And why? Because they're being given, their concerns are being met, their questions are being answered. When they look around the room, they see other people who look like them. Yeah. And so it fits. And so that program, if we put attention to it, can very easily grow. And in other places where we've done that, we have good success. It's not that people aren't interested or they're not receptive, or no, they're hugely receptive. You just have to give them attention. And, well, this is my thought, you have to give them attention in a different environment. If you just think that you're not this body, and therefore we're going to go on with our ISKCON Bharatiya Samaj program on Sunday, and just merge everyone else into it, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Niche marketing works. Short answer. But Western people, Europeans, Indian. I'll give you another example. In Africa, the whole East Coast, Botswana, South Africa, Kenya, it's all Indians. 95, 98% Indian people, and a few local black people or Afrikaners, very few. And on the West Coast, it's all Africans. The pujaris are Africans, the accountants are Africans, the temple president's an African, the school teachers are Africans, the preachers are Africans. And there's, a very small number of Indians who help and who are involved, who are devotees. But otherwise, it's all Africans. Because, first of all, there are not that many Indians in those places. South Africa's chock-a-block with Indians. The West Coast isn't. And especially Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj gave so much energy to preaching to the African people, and they become wonderful devotees. It's not that, well, if there are no Indians here, what are we going to do? You preach to the people who are there, they'll become wonderful devotees. And Kadamba Maharaj especially gave emphasis to that in South Africa. When he started preaching to the African people, started making African devotees. Wonderful African devotees. But you have to work at it. You have to give them attention. You have to understand that they're not Indians. That it's going to be a different game. But you can make wonderful. Well, here's Patrick. You're running your program and people are coming. They're not so much Indians. They're Westerners. But do they show interest? Do they come? Yes. So you start with that emphasis, and you'll get more and more and more. We can do so many programs like that. And while we're at it, we're totally missing the Hispanic market. Another group of people who are very, very pious, very receptive, interested in mystical subject matters, totally available, and just if you don't give them attention, they won't come. But if you give them attention, they'll become involved, they'll become devotees. And so it works for all sorts of groups of people. They may be African, they may be Hispanic, they may be, you name it. And Prabhupada proved it, that people from any background can become Krishna conscious. Prabhupada demonstrated that. Chinese, Russian. You know, we never thought that Russians would become Krishna conscious. Russians were people who were totally, what's the word, brainwashed by the Soviet authorities. Where was the question of their becoming? How could you even spread anything there? And it's, you know, it's like one of our strongest places. And then China. So there's no restriction that only these people, only those people. And again, it's my thought, although it's not really my thought, but when you see the Indian people preaching to the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans, the Europeans, then you're really going to see something happening. Then you're really going to see something happening. Bharata Bhumite Manusha Parapakar. Probably would emphasize that. In my view, the Indian diaspora, which is really, you know, just objectively and materially speaking, a huge phenomenon. If you look where so much capability has landed in America, or where it's coming from, it's coming from Indians. Look at your top companies and see who's leading them. Look at the American government and see the disproportionate number of Indians who are entering into government even. Look at money and see who's making the most of it in terms of, you know, ethnic populations in an incredibly short period of time. So the Indians have such capability. And when they turn their attention toward preaching Krishna consciousness to those who are not Indians, you're going to see tremendous impact. That's my thought. And therefore the Indian diaspora can be seen as Krishna's arrangement, you know, planting agents all over the world for spreading Krishna consciousness. And when, yeah. And I'm fine, by the way, with more preaching to Indians, because that's more and more people who can then preach to everyone else. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Since we're not going to the Bowery,
Yes.
are there any stories you might like to share from that?
Well, those days, of course, were long before I came, although when I came, the Bowery was still the Bowery. If you want a good description of the Bowery, read Srila Prabhupada. That's what Maharshi's really taken considerable effort to lay out what the Bowery was historically and practically. But it was a place of, as the Lower East Side was hippies, the Bowery was drunkards, real hardcore drunkards, people who had no place to stay, people whose life was alcohol, frowsy and you know, totally dominated by alcohol. That was the Bowery, and who would sleep in miserable conditions, what they call flop houses, and who would gather around, right in this neighborhood, fires. You know, they build it in the winter. They build a fire in a trash can and gather around the trash can and sing, you know, because they were crazy. Their arms would be in casts, or because they'd fall and break something. That was the Bowery. But Prabhupada went there. Yeah. And in fact, that one reporter visited Prabhupada in one of those Bowery lofts.
Yeah.
And he was like struck that Prabhupada was obviously a cultured and educated and aristocratic kind of person, and to be finding him in the Bowery, first of all, surrounded by these people, you know, on the street who were below, and then to see him in a loft surrounded by these really crazy hippies was astonishing to him. You know, people who were doing this asana and that asana and standing on their heads and staring at candles or doing whatever they're doing. And then he went to the back of the loft and met Prabhupada, you know, sort of sitting behind a curtain. And he asked Prabhupada, what are those people doing out there in the loft? And Prabhupada said, I don't know. He said, I'm trying to teach them something, but they are not understanding. So Prabhupada was humbly aristocratic. He was so aristocratic, really, in his culture. And yet he was prepared to live in the Bowery to spread Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. So, what can we say about Prabhupada's compassion, about Prabhupada's patience, about Prabhupada's humility, about Prabhupada's determination to carry out the mission given to him? It's just such an example for us. What can we say? That Prabhupada did that. An ordinary person, just an ordinary New Yorker, wouldn't want to go to the Bowery. Nobody would. You know, just, you wouldn't feel safe, you had no reason to go there, you'd avoid the place. And Prabhupada lived there. Yes.
It's a degraded place for a very long time. There's a famous song called The Bowery. I'll never go there anymore, and it dates to 1891.
1891, the Bowery, I'll never go there again. Yeah. No, it was the epitome of the mode of ignorance. In fact, even as late as 1968, when I came, after the Sunday feast, there'd be prasadam left over, and in big pots that we didn't have enough space for. So the devotees, you're not supposed to waste prasadam. They would go to these places where the bums lived, these flop houses or whatever, and distribute prasadam to them. And they'd be enthusiastic about it. And if it was a little bit turned, they'd be more enthusiastic. Got a little bit off. Then the boys would say, well, it's rum cake. One time Prabhupada told us that we should go to the Bowery and have kirtan and ask for donations also. And we did. And the kirtan was very successful, and the bums gave donations. Yeah. Yes.
One favorable aspect of Prabhupada at 94 Bowery was that he was on the western edge of Chinatown at the time, which has now become more widespread. And unlike the West End Superette, where if there was any spice at all, it was, as Prabhupada said, 10 times what he would pay for in India. Everything was there in these Chinese markets. So Prabhupada actually appreciated that aspect. And the other quality of the Bowery, why did Prabhupada go there in the first place, was because Harvey Cohn who initially met Prabhupada not at 72nd Street, but at Ananda Ashram, which is still continuing today, and has now become like a big cheese in the overall Bhajan Borscht Belt scene up there in the Hudson Valley area. He gave Prabhupada his space. There are these like pre-war World War I walk-up buildings. That means no elevator. That's another aspect of Prabhupada at 94 Bowery. he had to walk up 4 big flights of stairs, up and down, for every move he had to make to go out of that building. So as that area had become like kind of derelict and destitute, and these buildings were previously used for like workhouses and factories, so they're like an entire floor. So to attract the realtors at the time, there's a lot of artists and people who need a big space, musicians. It wasn't just like hippies, it was like musicians.
Yeah.
So
Artists,
they called
musicians.
them AIR, Artist in Resident Loft, that you can rent an entire space cheap.
Yeah.
So that's what Harvey Cohn did, that's what Michael Grant did. Mukunda Maj, interestingly enough, 94 Bowery, 96, 98, 100, 3 addresses north of Prabhupada was Mukunda Maj's Artist in Residence Loft. And of course, he was the one that Prabhupada appealed to when he was chased out of the loft. And how did Mukunda Maj come to know about Prabhupada? A friend who had seen Prabhupada in his loft. Prabhupada had printed out pieces of paper, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, come, and he handed him on the 14A bus, which still exists today, on Grand Street. He said, go check it out. And Prabhupada, just like that was Fred McDonough, who wrote the article for the Village Voice, and was published June 1966, was just shocked that Prabhupada, such an aristocratic, elevated, high-class gentleman and scholar, spiritual personality, was living in this, as he said, in the Skid Row of New York.
You'd expect him to have been where he started, where we visited this morning, Riverside Drive and the Upper West Side. That's where you would expect to find a person of Prabhupada's background, and instead he's here where my parents wouldn't want to come here. No normal person. I mean, now you could. We were hearing anyway. It was like $3,000, $4,000 to rent a flat here, a small flat, for what was 20 back then, 40. So this was really a down area, and Prabhupada came. It's just extraordinary. His willingness to do whatever he needed to do to carry out Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement and to uplift, one person at a time, or groups at a time, fallen souls. Just unparalleled.
Marsh, did you tell everyone, like you told us, that when Prabhupada appealed to Mukunda Maharaj, that try to find me a nice,
Allen Ginsberg wrote in his introduction to the original condensed Bhagavad Gita, what compassion Swami Bhaktivedanta showed by choosing to tend to the Lower East Side, the center of, hippie, such and such. But the actual story was when he was chased out of that loft, Prabhupada asked Mukunda, please try to find me a place in a respectable location. Here we are. It was a respectable location, only time was separating us.
across the street were like 3 tombstone cellars.
There were the tombstone cellars, a laundromat next door on this side, a gas station on that side, and nothing. You go down the block this way, they've got luxury high-rises and all that. No, the old Ukrainian neighborhood.
Could you get me the Prabhupada picture book, please, someone? There's a famous picture of Prabhupada crossing the street here, and that's right on the north side of 2nd Street, about to cross 2nd Avenue. And what is now the Whole Foods and a big condominium was just parking lots. Let's see if I can find the picture real close.
I have to say also that the space that we're sitting in Prabhupada's time just felt like such a transcendental place. It felt like Vaikuntha, like the spiritual world. All around, modes of nature were bubbling and churning and brewing. But when you came in here, it was the spiritual world. This record player is pretty much like what we have. And after the breakfast or whatever, we would be doing service here, whatever it might be. We would just turn on the record and play it for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, while we were doing our work. Then we turn it over and play the other side for another 2 hours. And it created, the vibration, the service, the atmosphere, the consciousness of Prabhupada chanting. It created the spiritual world here at 26 Second Avenue.
Here is the picture.
Yeah.
Ron, where is that exactly?
Here's First Street, excuse me, that's Second Street. First Street, this side, the north side of First Street, here, about to cross Second Avenue. That's exactly where the spot was.
It's all empty.
That record was recorded at the Adelphi Record Studio on 46th Street and Times Square. So that puts, so Prabhupada had walked around Times Square. He had visited there regularly, and when they were waiting for their turn to record that Happening album, he with his disciples, this is in December of 1966, walked around Times